Namaskaram. Mahabharatam, Bheeshma Parvam. We are in the middle of the war and on the 10th day. After the 9th day's battle, it was Krishna who suggested to Yudhishthira, look, this way we are never going to win the war. As long as the Bheeshma is there on the other side, uh, before any chance, he will finish all over the entire army of the Pandavas. So think of ways to defeat him. Take him out of the picture. Yudhishthira said, how Krishna? Krishna said, you ask him directly himself. Ask, he is your grandfather. Ask your grandfather, how can we defeat you? And Yudhishthira thought that is the probably only way. And that night, when everyone had retired, the Pandavas, Yudhishthira and his brothers, and also Krishna went to Bheeshma's tent. All the great warriors had their private tents. So had Bheeshma. And Yudhishthira asked Bheeshma, grandfather, how can we defeat you? And Bheeshma had given the tips which he went through last day. That you know that I shall not fight Shikhandi because he was born a girl. So if you have Shikhandi in front of you, and from behind if you attack me, I shall not take up my arms when I see Shikhandi in front of me. So that is the way you can defeat me. And they took that tip. And on the 10th day, right from the morning, they tried to thrust into the Kaurava army and to get near Bheeshma, which Shikhandi kept in the front. So it must be Shikhandi's chariot first, right behind that, most likely Arjuna, to fight against Bheeshma when he would not take up his arms. Whether sensing this or not, the Kauravas that day, they were coming in between when Arjuna with Shikhandi in front tried to get near Bheeshma. And one of their heroes were coming in the middle and at least delaying their getting near Bheeshma. And finally, much before the sunset, Arjuna, right behind Shikhandi, came face to face against Bheeshma. True to his words, when he saw Shikhandi in front, Bheeshma kept his weapons away and sat there. Because whom he see in front was Shikhandi, and right behind Shikhandi was Krishna as the chariot. So Bheeshma kept his arms folded in prayer mode to Krishna. And arrows from Shikhandi and from Arjuna right behind were penetrating his armor and going deep into his body. There were occasions when these arrows penetrated his body. Bheeshma got impatient and he took a javelin which was near him and hurled it against Arjuna, who was right behind. He wouldn't throw it against Shikhandi. And Arjuna, of course, had no difficulty in sending arrows to cut the javelin into pieces. This happened on a couple of times. And soon there were arrows stuck deep in his body, arrows sent by Shikhandi as well as by uh, Arjuna. And of course, Bhishma could say, oh, this arrow is from Arjuna and not from Shikhandi, because it has gone deep into me and it is hurting my nerves. And these are not Shikhandis. He spoke these words to Dushasana, who happened to be near him at that time. And at other times, look, these light arrows which come like lightning, like Vajra Nipata, like lightning, and they are coming one after other in a row. Surely these are from Arjuna and not from Shikhandi. These were some of the words he spoke when he sat there, not fighting, just receiving the arrows as they struck him and going deep into him. And finally, the grandfather picked up his sword on his right hand and shield on his left, and he wanted to jump from the chariot to fight against Arjuna. But by then, there were arrows stuck all over his body. He fell headlong from his chariot down. But his body didn't touch the ground. Instead, he was lying on a bed of arrows with all the arrows stuck on him. That was his famous Sharashayya, the bed of arrows on his he lied. Most of the war scenes we understand are from Sanjaya, as he reported them to the blind Dhritarashtra. Sanjaya was the minister and he was employed to report the war scenes as they happened to the Dhritarashtra. And Sanjaya narrated these scenes to Dhritarashtra as Bhishma fell from his chariot on a bed of arrows. And it was still Dakshinayana, this southern journey of the sun from the summer solstice to the winter solstice. And there was one scene when in heaven the gods were discussing, oh, what is this? Will Bhishma with his Swachanda Mrityu, that means the time of death was at his command, he could decide. Will he decide to die when it is still Dakshinayana, when the sun hasn't crossed from the southern hemisphere to the north? And it is said some of the celestial sages, the Devarishis, they took shape as swans, and came flying to Bhishma and passed near him with the words, will this Bhishma decide to leave his body when the sun is still on its journey from the summer solstice to the winter solstice? And they just flew away as though to convey the message, remind Bhishma. And Bhishma, of course, replied, saying, no, I shall wait for the sun to return on its return journey to the summer solstice, that is Uttarayana. And of course, there were Pushpavrishti from the sun, from the sky, when the gods showered flowers on Bheeshma, who was on his death bed. And Bhishma, when he fell, his body was on arrows, but his head was hanging. So he asked Arjuna, who was nearby. By then, Arjuna had left his chariot and had come to Bhishma with folded hands and asked Arjuna, Arjuna, look at my head, it is hanging. I am not comfortable. And Arjuna realized what the grandfather was after. So he sent 3 arrows to the earth, right where the grandfather's head was. And they penetrated the earth and came up as 3 arrows, 2 of them in one level and the third slightly up, so that it was like a pillow for the grandfather. And that was exactly what the grandfather was after. It is said in folklore that when Acharya asked for a pillow, Duryodhana came with very soft cushions, and Acharya smiled. No, this is not the pillow I will like now. And looked at Arjuna, and it was then Arjuna said these arrows. It is what he said. And afterwards, after a while, the Acharya said, oh, I am thirsty. I can't stand this thirst. And similarly, in the folklore, it is said Duryodhana asked for milk and other drinks for the Acharya, but he refused them all and looked at Arjuna. And Arjuna sent a shaft, pulling his bow to the very end extreme, and sent an arrow which penetrated deep into the earth. And from that arrow came up a fountain of water, which was said to be Akasha Ganga, down deep into the earth. And that fountain came up and fell right on the grandfather's mouth, and he drank the water and he said, oh, I'm so relieved. This is exactly what I wanted. And then he turned to Duryodhana and other Kauravas, who by then had gathered near Bheeshma to pay their respect. Said, look what Arjuna has done. There is no one on earth to achieve this, accomplish this. So you should realize that it is futile to fight against the Pandavas when Arjuna is there. Better come in terms with him, so that at least with my passing away, the quarrel between you come to an end, and you come in terms with each other. But of course, Duryodhana was too stern in his resolve. That's another matter. And that was the 10th day's battle. After this, they stopped fighting, though there was still daytime left. They stopped fighting and gathered around Bheeshma with folded hands. And we also end today's story with this. Namaskaram.